I came back for what's mine. All of it.
The notification on my phone lit up like a neon sign in chaos. Your ride has been canceled. Third one tonight. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic outside some fancy Dallas high-rise, watching rich folks stumble out of their ivory tower while I scraped together nickels to pay for gas. James Holloway, former owner of a $22 million ranch, now driving for scraps like some broke college kid. Funny how fast you can fall from Texas royalty to rideshare peasant. My phone buzzed again. Another ride request, this time from the same building. Some lady named Patricia forgot her purse upstairs and needed a ride back to grab it. $5 for a 2-block round trip. I'd driven oil executives to private jets for less dignity than this. But here I was, accepting rides that wouldn't cover a decent cup of coffee. You, James? The woman who slid into my back seat looked like she'd been carved out of old money and polished with new gilt. Designer everything. But her eyes held that particular exhaustion that comes from working for people who think money makes them gods. That's me. You Patricia? Patricia Vance, executive assistant at Lone Star Holdings. She fumbled with her phone, clearly stressed. I'm so sorry about this. My boss will end me if I don't get those contracts back tonight. Lone Star Holdings. The name hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my face neutral. That was the company my ex-wife Alicia had mentioned during our divorce proceedings. Something about new business opportunities with her lawyer boyfriend, Trent Maddox. No problem. Happens to everyone. To her office took exactly 3 minutes. Patricia rushed inside while I waited, engine running, watching the city lights blur through my cracked windshield. This wasn't how I'd pictured my life at 33. 6 months ago, I'd owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, employed 40 people, and had politicians returning my calls. Now, I was counting quarters and sleeping on my boxing coach's couch. Patricia returned with her purse and something else, a thick manila envelope that she clutched like it contained state secrets. Actually, she said as I pulled away from the curb, could you take me to the Marriott instead? My boss is waiting there, and these documents can't wait until morning. Your boss works late. Mr. Holloway doesn't sleep much, especially since the acquisition talks started heating up. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Holloway? James Holloway Sr. You know him? He owns most of the commercial real estate downtown, plus Lone Star Holdings. Tough old bird, but fair. Been fighting cancer for 2 years, but you'd never know it watching him work. The world tilted sideways. James Holloway Sr., my father, the man who'd walked out on my mother when I was 8 years old and never looked back. I'd spent 25 years convinced he was dead, or didn't give a single thought about his bastard son. Turns out, he'd been building an empire 50 miles from my ranch. Yeah, I managed. I know the name. Patricia studied me in the rearview mirror. You look like him, actually. Same jaw, same eyes. You related? Something like that. Marriott appeared ahead, all glass and steel, reaching toward the stars I used to think belonged to me. Patricia gathered her things, then paused with her hand on the door handle. You know what's funny? Mr. Holloway mentioned you once. Said he had a son who owned a big ranch out west. Said he was proud of what you'd built, but too stubborn to pick up the phone and tell you himself. My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. When was this? About 3 months ago, right before he passed. She stepped out, then leaned down to the window. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Holloway. Your father was a good man who made some bad choices, but he never stopped talking about you. 3 months. He'd been dead for 3 months, and I'd never known. While I was fighting Alicia in divorce court, while she was taking everything I'd built, while Trent Maddox was helping her destroy my life piece by piece, my father was dying alone in some hospital room. Patricia was halfway to the hotel entrance when she turned back. Oh, and Mr. Holloway, you should probably call the law offices of Morrison, Blake & Associates tomorrow. Your father left some things for you. I sat in that parking lot for an hour after she disappeared into the hotel, staring at my phone, trying to process what I just learned. My father, the man I'd hated for abandoning us, the man I'd sworn to surpass and prove wrong, had been watching me build my ranch empire, had been proud of me, and now he was gone. taking any chance of reconciliation with him. But he'd left me something. And tomorrow, I was going to find out what. The next morning, I stood in the marble lobby of Morrison, Blake & Associates, feeling like a fraud in my only clean shirt and jeans with holes in the knees. The receptionist, a blonde who looked like she'd been hired more for decoration than typing skills, kept glancing at me like I might steal something. "Mr. Holloway will see you now," she finally announced, leading me down a hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men in expensive suits. The conference room could have housed a small aircraft. At the head of a table that probably cost more than my car sat a man who looked like he'd been born wearing a three-piece suit. James Holloway, Jr., I presume? He stood and extended a manicured hand. "Robert Morrison, I was your father's attorney for 37 years. I didn't even know he was alive until last night." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Yes, he mentioned that. He regretted the distance between you, but he was a complicated man. Proud. Stubborn. Sound familiar?" I couldn't argue with that. Morrison opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table like he was dealing cards. "Your father owned 75% of Lone Star Holdings, which includes commercial real estate, oil leases, and transportation contracts throughout Texas. The company's current market value is approximately $47 million. The room started spinning. $47 million? He also owns several properties in Dallas, Austin, and Houston, plus a considerable stock portfolio. All told, you're inheriting assets worth approximately $63 million. I sat down hard in the nearest chair. $63 million? While I was scraping together gas money and sleeping on couches, I was secretly worth more than most small countries. There are conditions, of course," Morrison continued. "Your father was very specific about how these assets should be managed. He wanted to ensure you understood the responsibility that comes with this kind of wealth." "What kind of conditions?" "Nothing unreasonable. You'll need to take an active role in managing Lone Star Holdings. No selling off pieces for quick cash. And there's a personal request. He wanted you to use these resources to make things right in your life." His words, not mine. Make things right. I thought about Alicia, living in my ranch house with her lawyer boyfriend, spending money from my company accounts, probably laughing about how completely she'd destroyed me. I thought about all the friends who'd abandoned me when the scandal broke, who'd chosen sides based on who had more money and social standing. When do I take control? Immediately. I just need your signature on these documents, and you'll be the majority owner of one of the largest private companies in Texas. I signed my name with a hand that barely trembled. James Holloway, Jr., millionaire. It had a nice ring to it. Walking out of that law office, I felt different. The same sun was shining. The same traffic was crawling through downtown Dallas. But everything had changed. I wasn't the broken, defeated man who'd driven Patricia to her meeting 12 hours earlier. I was something new, something dangerous. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Alicia's number. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. Then I put the phone away. She'd hear from me soon enough. But not yet. First, I had some planning to do. The old James would have called immediately, would have gloated, would have demanded she return everything she'd stolen. But the old James was dead, buried under the weight of betrayal and humiliation. This new version was going to be much more careful, much more patient, much more ruthless. Frankie's boxing gym smelled like sweat, determination, and broken dreams. Exactly the kind of place where a man could reinvent himself. I'd been coming here for 3 months, ever since the divorce papers were finalized, and I needed somewhere to hit things without getting arrested. "You're holding back again," Frankie Morales called out as I worked the heavy bag. At 62, he was built like a fire hydrant and twice as tough. "Whatever's eating at you, take it out on the leather, not yourself." I threw a combination that would have dropped most men, but Frankie just shook his head. "Better, but you're still thinking too much. Boxing's like revenge. It's all about timing and patience." Funny how he'd chosen that word. "Speaking of revenge," I said, unwrapping my hands, "what would you do if someone took everything from you? Your house, your business, your reputation?" Frankie studied me with eyes that had seen too much. "Depends. We talking about getting even or getting ahead?" "What's the difference?" "Getting even means you end up where you started. Getting ahead means you end up on top, and they end up in the dirt." He handed me a towel. Smart money's always on getting ahead. That afternoon, I drove out to my old ranch for the first time since the divorce. Seeing it hurt worse than any punch Frankie had ever thrown. The house I'd built with my own hands was still there, but everything else had changed. New cars in the driveway, including Trent's ridiculous red Mustang convertible. New furniture on the porch. Even a new sign by the gate. Maddox Ranch. Maddox Ranch. She'd given my family's land to her boyfriend. I parked on the county road and watched through binoculars as Alicia and Trent played house in my home. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's car payments, and he was strutting around in cowboy boots that had never seen a day's work. They looked like two kids playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Holloway? This is Patricia Vance from Lone Star Holdings. I have some information you might find interesting about your ex-wife's new business ventures. I'm listening. She and Mr. Maddox have been using shell companies to purchase water rights and mineral leases throughout your old county. They're planning to subdivide the ranch and sell it to developers from Austin. Shampoo, the bastards weren't just living in my house. They were planning to destroy everything I'd built and turn it into suburban sprawl. How do you know this? Mr. Maddox used our company's legal services before he knew you were the new owner. The contracts are still on file. Patricia, remind me to give you a raise. That evening, I sat in my new downtown office, a corner suite in the building I now owned, and studied the documents Patricia had provided. Alicia and Trent's plan was actually clever. Buy up the surrounding land, subdivide everything into 5-acre plots, and sell luxury ranch estates to city folks who wanted to play cowboy on weekends. They'd make about $20 million and destroy 100 years of ranching history in the process. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was beaten, broken, and out of the game permanently. They had no idea that the man they'd destroyed had risen from the ashes with more money and power than they could imagine. Time to remind them that James Holloway didn't stay down. The Cattlemen's Association Charity Gala was the social event of the season. 500 of Texas's wealthiest ranchers, oilmen, and politicians gathered to pat themselves on the back and write tax-deductible checks. I hadn't planned to attend, but then I learned that Alicia and Trent would be there, probably announcing their development plans to potential investors. I bought a table for 10 and invited 9 of the most influential people I could find. Oil executives, real estate moguls, and a federal judge who owed my father several favors. By the time we walked into the ballroom at the Four Seasons, I had an entourage that turned heads and started whispers. Alicia saw me first. I watched the color drain from her face as she recognized me across the crowded room. She grabbed Trent's arm and whispered something urgent in his ear. He turned, spotted me, and his expression shifted from confusion to anger to something that might have been fear. Good. Fear was a start. I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands and making small talk, but keeping my eyes on my targets. They were trapped at their table near the stage, surrounded by potential investors who were probably hearing all about the exciting development opportunities in my old county. James Holloway, a familiar voice called out. I turned to see Sheriff Bob Crawford, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Heard you were back in town. Thought you might be keeping a lower profile after everything. Crawford had been in Alicia's pocket since the divorce proceedings began. Funny how a few campaign contributions could buy a man's integrity. Bob, I said, matching his fake smile with one of my own. Good to see you. How's the wife? She's fine. Listen, James, I hope there won't be any trouble tonight. Lot of important people here, and folks are still talking about that incident at the Roadhouse last month. Hollower. When I'd confronted Trent at a local bar and called him out for being a parasite who'd never built anything in his life. When I'd suggested he was the kind of man who got his kicks stealing other men's wives because he couldn't attract a woman on his own merits. When he'd thrown the first punch and I'd finished the fight. No trouble from me, Bob. I'm just here to support a good cause. Crawford studied my face, looking for signs of the broken man he'd helped destroy. But that man was gone, replaced by someone with the patience to play a longer game. See that you are, he said, and moved away. The dinner portion of the evening passed without incident. I chatted with my table guests, donated generously to the charity auction, and played the role of the successful businessman who'd moved on from his personal troubles. But I was watching Alicia and Trent the entire time, noting who they talked to, what they said, how they reacted when people mentioned my name. Then came the presentation portion of the evening, when various ranchers and developers would pitch their projects to potential investors. Trent took the stage looking confident and polished, every inch the successful lawyer turned rancher. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom sound system, "I want to tell you about an exciting opportunity to be part of Texas's future while honoring its past." Phillips, he clicked a remote, and a slide appeared showing an aerial view of my old ranch, my family's land, where my grandfather had raised cattle and my father had learned to ride before he'd abandoned us for the city. Maddox Ranch represents the perfect blend of luxury living and authentic Western heritage, Trent continued. We're offering exclusive 5-acre estates where successful families can experience the ranching lifestyle without sacrificing modern conveniences. The presentation continued for 10 minutes, complete with architectural renderings, financial projections, and testimonials from satisfied customers at similar developments. It was slick, professional, and completely soulless. Everything my ranch had never been. When Trent finished to polite applause, the evening's host took the microphone. "Thank you, Trent. Now, are there any questions from our guests?" I stood up. Every head in the room turned toward me, and I could feel the tension ratchet up several notches. "I have a question," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Trent's confident smile faltered slightly. "Of course, James. What would you like to know?" "I'm curious about the water rights situation. As I understand it, the Holloway Ranch, Maddox Ranch, depends on several underground aquifers that extend beyond the property boundaries. What happens to your luxury development if those water rights get purchased by someone else?" Trent's smile became more forced. "Well, that's not really a concern. The water rights are tied to the land ownership, and we have long-term agreements with neighboring properties." "Interesting," I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling through some documents Patricia had prepared. Because according to county records, most of those water rights were sold separately from the land parcels over the past 50 years. And as of this morning, they're all owned by Lone Star Holdings. The room went completely quiet. I could see Alicia whispering urgently to Trent, who was starting to look like a man who just realized he was standing in quicksand. "Furthermore," I continued, "Lone Star Holdings also owns the mineral rights to approximately 60% of the land you're planning to develop. Rights that were never transferred during the divorce proceedings because they weren't part of the ranch's assets. They were purchased separately by my father in 1987. Trent was sweating now, his polished confidence cracking like ice in the sun. "I'm not sure what you're implying, James, but—" "I'm not implying anything," I said, my voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear this wasn't a friendly inquiry. "I'm stating facts. Your development can't proceed without access to water and mineral rights that you don't own and can't purchase, which makes your entire presentation tonight a waste of everyone's time." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Judge Harrison, one of my dinner guests, spoke up from our table. "Mr. Maddox, is this accurate? Are you asking for investments in a project that lacks the necessary resource rights?" Trent opened his mouth, closed it, then looked desperately toward Alicia. But she was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted hatred, mixed with something that might have been respect. "I think," said the evening's host, "we should move on to our next presentation. Thank you, Mr. Maddox." Trent left the stage to scattered, uncomfortable applause. As he passed my table, he leaned down and whispered, "This isn't over, Holloway." I smiled up at him. "You're absolutely right. It's just getting started." Morning after the charity gala, I was reviewing property acquisition reports in my office when Patricia knocked on the door. She entered carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been up all night researching. "I have news," she said, setting the coffee on my desk. "Good news and interesting news." "Give me the interesting news first." Trent Maddox called our legal distriction 1.5 dailers, including this truly bluck than time. Trent Maddox called our legal department at 6 a.m., demanding to speak with whoever handles mineral rights acquisitions. When they told him he'd need to speak with the owner, he apparently lost his mind, used language that would make a sailor blush. I sipped my coffee and waited for the rest. The good news is that 3 of the investors from last night have called asking about partnership opportunities with Lone Star Holdings. Word is spreading that you're back in the game, and people want to be on the winning side. What about Alicia and Trent? Any word from their camp? Parole turned predatory. Alicia called twice, but I told her you were in meetings. Trent tried to set up an appointment through his law firm, but I informed them that Lone Star Holdings no longer uses Morrison Blake & Associates for legal services due to potential conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest? I may have changed this, implied that Mr. Maddox's previous use of our legal services while planning to defraud you created ethical complications. It's not technically true, but it sounds official enough to make other lawyers nervous about working with him. I was beginning to understand why my father had kept Patricia around for so many years. The woman had a devious mind wrapped in a professional exterior. "What's our next move?" I asked. "Well, that depends on how far you want to take this. We could simply block their development and force them to sell the ranch back to you at a loss. Or could destroy them completely." I leaned back in my chair and studied Patricia's face. She looked like a Sunday school teacher discussing flower arrangements, but her eyes held the cold calculation of a chess master planning checkmate. "What did you have in mind?" "Your ex-wife and Mr. Maddox have been using the ranch as collateral for several high-interest loans. They borrowed against the property to fund their development plans, assuming they could flip the land quickly for a massive profit. But without water and mineral rights, the land is worth maybe a third of what they paid for it. So they're overextended. Catastrophically overextended. If those loans get called in, they'll lose everything. The ranch, their other properties, probably their cars and personal assets too." "And how exactly would those loans get called in?" Patricia's smile widened. "Lone Star Holdings has business relationships with most of the major banks in Texas. If we were to express concerns about the borrower's ability to repay, based on new information about their collateral's actual value, the banks would demand immediate payment. Within 30 days, typically. I thought about Alicia, living in my house, sleeping in my bed, probably laughing about how completely she'd outmaneuvered me. I thought about Trent, strutting around in his expensive boots, playing cowboy with my cattle, making plans to turn my family's legacy into suburban sprawl. "Do it," I said. That afternoon, I drove out to the ranch again. But this time, I didn't hide on the county road. I parked right in front of the main house and walked up to the door like I owned the place. Which, in about 30 days, I probably would. Alicia answered the door wearing yoga pants and a tank top, looking like she'd just finished working out. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her expression hardened into the mask of cold fury I remembered from our divorce proceedings. "What do you want, James?" "Just thought I'd stop by and see how you're enjoying my house. It's not your house anymore. The divorce decree was very clear about that." "Funny thing about legal documents," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "They're only as good as the assumptions they're based on, and a lot of assumptions are about to be proven wrong." Trent appeared behind her, shirtless and sweaty, clearly trying to establish his territorial dominance. "You need to leave, Holloway. You're trespassing." "Actually, I'm not. The county road is public property, and I have legal right-of-way access to check on my mineral rights, which, as I mentioned last night, I still own." "Your mineral rights?" Alicia's voice cracked slightly. 60% of this property, including the areas around the main house and the prime grazing land. My father bought them in 1987, long before I met you. They were never marital property, so they couldn't be transferred in the divorce. I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating the implications. Alicia had always been smart. It's one of the things that had attracted me to her originally. But intelligence without wisdom was just cleverness, and cleverness had its limitations. "What do you want?" she asked again, but this time her voice held a note of uncertainty. "Nothing you can give me," I said. "I just wanted to see the place one more time before you lose it." "We're not losing anything," Trent said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Check your bank statements," I suggested. "I think you'll find some interesting developments in the next few days." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Alicia? You might want to start looking for a new place to live. I hear the rental market is pretty tight right now." 3 days later, Patricia knocked on my office door with a folder full of documents and a smile that could have powered the building. "The first loan got called in this morning," she announced. "Cattleman's Bank is demanding $2.3 million within 30 days. How did they react?" Trent spent an hour on the phone with their loan officer, alternating between threats and begging. Alicia called 3 other banks trying to arrange a bridge loan, but word has already spread about their collateral problems. And the other loans? First National called theirs in, 3 those in 14. And the Trents to check on my loan read, unless First National called theirs in an hour ago. Texas Commerce Bank will probably follow suit by tomorrow. All told, they owe approximately $4.7 million, secured by property that's now worth maybe $1.8 million. I did the math in my head. Even if they sold everything they owned, they'd still be short at least $2 million. In Texas, that kind of debt could follow them for the rest of their lives. "There's more," Patricia continued. "I did some digging into Mr. Maddox's law practice. Turns out he's been using client escrow accounts to fund his personal investments. It's not technically embezzlement if he pays it back quickly. But with his current cash flow problems, he's about to become a felon. The state bar takes a very dim view of lawyers who play fast and loose with client money. Even if he avoids criminal charges, he'll lose his license." I walked to my office window and looked out at the Dallas skyline. Somewhere out there, Alicia and Trent were probably having the worst day of their lives, watching their dreams crumble like sandcastles at high tide. Part of me, the part that remembered loving her, that remembered building a life together, felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. But that part was small and getting smaller. "What about their personal assets?" I asked. "The Mustang is financed, but they're upside down on the loan. The jewelry and artwork they bought with the ranch's profits could be liquidated, but it won't be nearly enough. They're looking at personal bankruptcy, assuming they can avoid criminal charges." "And the ranch?" "Will go to auction within 60 days. As the holder of the mineral and water rights, you'll be in a position to make the only viable bid." "For how much?" "Maybe $1 million, possibly less." I thought about $20 million I'd lost in the divorce, the humiliation of watching Trent move into my house, the friends who'd abandoned me when the scandal broke. $1 million was a bargain for getting my life back. "Set it up," I said. That evening, I was working late in my office when security called to tell me I had visitors in the lobby. Alicia and Trent, looking like they'd aged 5 years in 3 days. "Send them up," I said. They entered my office like condemned prisoners approaching the gallows. Alicia's designer clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, and Trent looked like he hadn't slept since the charity gala. "James," Alicia began, "we need to talk." "I'm listening." "This has gone far enough. We both made mistakes during the divorce, but destroying each other won't help anyone." "I'm not destroying anyone," I said calmly. "I'm simply exercising my legal rights as a property owner and businessman." "You're bankrupting us," Trent said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You're using your father's money to settle personal scores. My father's money is my money now, and I'm using it to protect my interests, just like any rational businessman would." Allergies moved closer to my desk. "What will it take to end this? What do you want?" "I want my ranch back. We'll sell it to you, for what we paid, plus the improvements we've made." "That's not how auctions work, Alicia. You'll sell it for whatever the highest bidder offers, and given the water rights situation, I suspect that bidder will be me." "You bastard," Trent snarled. "You're enjoying this." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd helped my wife destroy my life. who'd moved into my house and slept in my bed and made plans to tear down everything I'd built. You know what, Trent? You're absolutely right. I am enjoying this. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a tool barrel. Alicia's face went pale, and Trent took a step backward. But not for the reasons you think, I continued. I'm not enjoying your suffering. I'm enjoying the justice of it. For 6 months, I lived in heck because of what you two did to me. I lost my home, my business, my reputation, my friends. I slept on couches and drove strangers around for gas money, while you played house with my life's work. I stood up and walked around my desk, stopping just close enough to make them uncomfortable. You want to know what I learned during those 6 months? I learned that when you lose everything, you find out who you really are, underneath all the possessions and social status. And what I found underneath was someone you really, really don't want as an enemy. James, Alicia started, I'm not finished. You two made one crucial mistake. You assumed that destroying me would keep me down permanently. You never considered that I might get back up. And you certainly never imagined that when I got back up, I'd be stronger than before. I walked back to my desk and sat down, the picture of calm professionalism. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to lose the ranch. You're going to lose your other properties. You're going to lose your cars, your jewelry, and probably your credit ratings. Trent's going to lose his law license and possibly face criminal charges. And I'm going to buy back my family's land for a fraction of what you stole it for. And then, Alicia asked quietly, and then you're going to disappear from my life forever. You're going to move somewhere far away and start over with nothing, just like I had to do. The difference is, I had the skills and character to build something from nothing. We'll see if you do. They left without another word, and I watched from my window as they walked to Trent's Mustang in the parking garage below. They stood beside the car for several minutes, clearly arguing, before finally driving away. I poured myself a drink and settled back in my chair. Phase 1 was complete. In 60 days, I'd own my ranch again. But that was just the beginning. I still had some old friends to visit. The Broken Spoke Saloon hadn't changed much in the 6 months since I'd been exiled from polite society. Same neon beer signs, same peanut shells on the floor, same crowd of ranchers and oil workers drowning their troubles in whiskey and lies. What had changed was the way people looked at me when I walked through the door. 6 months ago, I'd been one of them, a successful rancher, a pillar of the community, someone whose opinion mattered. Now, I was the cautionary tale, the man who'd lost everything to a cheating wife and couldn't handle it with dignity. At least, that's what they thought. I spotted my targets at a corner table: Mike Sullivan, Tom Bradley, and Steve Hutchins. 3 men who'd been my closest friends for over a decade, who'd stood up at my wedding, who'd helped me build my ranch from a struggling operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. 3 men who'd abandoned me the moment the scandal broke. I bought a round of drinks and walked over to their table. "Gentlemen," I said, setting down 4 beers, "mind if I join you?" The silence was deafening. The Beers' Mike, who'd been my best man and business partner in several cattle deals, couldn't even meet my eyes. Tom, who'd borrowed $50,000 from me 2 years earlier to save his failing feed store, suddenly found his beer bottle fascinating. Steve, who'd called me brother for 15 years, just stared at me like I was a ghost. "James," Mike finally said, "we heard you were back in town. News travels fast in a small community. This Facer thing, what's the community is like, really great there." "Look," Tom said, "if you're here to cause trouble, why would I cause trouble? We're all friends here, right?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. These men had known me long enough to recognize the edge in my voice, the controlled calm that meant I was at my most dangerous. "Things got complicated after the divorce," Steve said carefully. "People had to choose sides. And you chose Alicia's side. We chose the side that made sense for our families and businesses," Mike said, finally showing some backbone. "Alicia had the ranch, the connections, the social standing. You were—" He trailed off, realizing how cruel his words sounded. "I was what, Mike? Broken? Finished? Not worth maintaining a friendship with?" "You were angry," Tom said. "You were making threats, getting into fights, causing scenes. We couldn't be associated with that kind of behavior. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're right. I was angry. My wife was cheating on me with her lawyer, stealing my business, and turning my friends against me. Most people would be angry about that. The way you handled it, Steve began. The way I handled it was human. I cut him off. I made mistakes. I lost my temper. I said things I shouldn't have said. But I never lied. I never cheated. And I never betrayed the people who trusted me. Of my beer, and looked at each of them in turn. But that's all in the past now. I'm here to let you know that I don't hold grudges. The relief on their faces was almost comical. I'm glad to hear that, Mike said. Maybe we can all move forward and put this behind us. I agreed. In fact, I wanted to share some good news with you. I've come into some money recently. Quite a lot of money, actually. Great, James, Tom said, though he looked confused about where this was heading. I'm thinking about making some investments in the local community, supporting businesses owned by good, honest people who understand the value of loyalty and friendship. Now I had their full attention. The thing is, I continued, I've been doing some research into local business opportunities, and I've discovered some interesting information. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through some documents Patricia had prepared. Mike, did you know that your biggest customer, Lone Star Beef Processing, is owned by a subsidiary of my company? Trolley's face went white. Your company? I inherited Lone Star Holdings from my father. Turns out he owned quite a few businesses in this area, including the company that buys about 60% of your cattle. Jang, unsettledly. And Tom, that loan you got from Cattleman's Bank to expand your feed store? The bank sold that loan to a debt collection company last month. A debt collection company that I happen to own now. Rifles Tom's hands started shaking. Steve, your trucking contracts with the oil companies. Those all go through transportation brokers who work exclusively with Lone Star Holdings. Put my phone away and smiled at my 3 former friends. So here's the thing, gentlemen. I meant what I said about not holding grudges. The past is the past. But the future? The future depends on how we move forward from here. What do you want? Mike asked quietly. I want you to understand something. When you abandoned me 6 months ago, you didn't just hurt my feelings. You damaged my reputation, my business relationships, and my standing in this community. You helped Alicia destroy me because you thought she was the safer bet. My voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You were wrong. The silence stretched for what felt like an hour. Finally, Steve cleared his throat. James, we're sorry. We made a mistake. We should have stood by you. Yes, you should have. But sorry doesn't repair the damage you caused. Sorry doesn't give me back the 6 months of heck I went through because my closest friends decided I wasn't worth their loyalty. What can we do to make it right? Tom asked. I pretended to consider the question. Well, there are a few things. Mike, I'm going to need you to publicly acknowledge that you were wrong about the situation with Alicia. Tell people that you've learned new information that changes your perspective on what happened. What kind of new information? The truth. That she was cheating. That she was stealing from the ranch accounts. That she manipulated the divorce proceedings with her lawyer boyfriend's help. All things you could have discovered if you'd bothered to investigate before choosing sides. Mike nodded reluctantly. I can do that. Tom, your feed store has been spreading gossip about me for months. I want you to set the record straight. Let people know that I was the wronged party, not the villain. Okay. And Steve, I want you to use your trucking connections to make sure everyone in the oil patch knows that James Holloway is back in business and not to be underestimated. Done. I stood up and dropped a bunch of type-civility of this work. Gentlemen, it's been educational. I'll be watching to see how quickly you can repair the damage you helped cause. I was halfway to the door when Mike called out, James, what happens if we don't do what you're asking? I turned back and smiled. Then you'll discover that having me as a friend was much more pleasant than having me as an enemy. The next morning, I was reviewing acquisition reports when Patricia knocked on my door with a newspaper and a cup of coffee. You're going to want to see this, she said, spreading the local paper across my desk. The headline read, Local rancher's divorce scandal takes new turn. Below it was a detailed article about newly revealed evidence of financial misconduct and adultery in the Holloway divorce case, featuring quotes from longtime friends and business associates who were shocked to learn the truth about what really happened. Midlands, Tom, and Steve had wasted no time in rehabilitating my reputation. The article painted me as the wronged husband, who'd been unfairly vilified while his cheating wife and her lawyer boyfriend had stolen his life's work. "This is just the beginning," Patricia said. "I've been making calls to business contacts throughout the region. By the end of the week, everyone will know that you're back and that crossing you was a mistake." "What about Alicia and Trent?" "The ranch auction is scheduled for next Friday. They've tried to find alternative buyers, but word has gotten out about the water rights issue. No one wants to bid on property that comes with built-in legal problems." "And their other assets?" "Being liquidated as quickly as possible, but it won't be enough. They're looking at personal bankruptcy, regardless of what happens with the ranch." I walked to my window and looked out at the city where my father had built his empire. In 1 week, I'd own my family's land again. In 1 month, my reputation would be fully restored. In 6 months, I'd be more powerful than I'd ever been before. But there was still one more score to settle. "Patricia, I need you to arrange a meeting. There's someone I haven't talked to yet." "Who?" "The person who really orchestrated all of this. The mastermind behind my destruction." Patricia looked confused. "I thought that was your ex-wife and her lawyer." "No," I said, remembering a conversation from years ago. A business deal gone wrong. A friendship that had ended in betrayal. They were just the tools. Someone else was pulling the strings. "Who?" "Julia Morse, Alicia's best friend, the woman I fired for embezzlement 3 years ago." Julia Morse lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where middle management dreams went to die quietly. I parked across the street and watched her morning routine through the kitchen window. Coffee, newspaper, the same breakfast she'd probably eaten for 20 years. She looked older than I remembered, worn down by the weight of whatever guilt she'd been carrying. Or maybe just worn down by the effort of orchestrating my destruction. I'd figured it out 3 days earlier while reviewing old employee files from the ranch. Julia had been my office manager for 5 years before I'd caught her skimming money from vendor payments. Not a lot, just enough to supplement her salary and support her gambling habit. I'd fired her quietly, without pressing charges, thinking I was being merciful. Turns out, mercy was just another word for stupidity. She'd been the one with access to all my financial records, my business relationships, my personal information. She'd known about every weakness in my marriage, every stress point in my business, every vulnerability that could be exploited. And she'd been Alicia's best friend, the shoulder to cry on when our marriage started falling apart. The perfect position to orchestrate revenge. I waited until she left for work, then followed her to the insurance office where she'd been employed since I'd fired her. A step down from ranch manager to claims processor. But it had given her the time and motivation to plan my destruction. She was walking to her car after work when I approached her. "Hello, Julia." She spun around and for just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw fear, guilt, and something that might have been satisfaction before she composed herself. "James, I heard you were back in town." "I bet you did. In fact, I bet you've been keeping very close tabs on my situation." "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. You've been watching and waiting to see if your plan worked, wondering if I'd stay down permanently, or if I'd eventually figure out who was really behind everything." Relinquished Julia's face went pale, but she maintained her composure. "You're paranoid, James. Losing everything has made you see conspiracies where there aren't any. 3 years ago, I caught you stealing from my company. Instead of prosecuting you, I fired you quietly and let you keep your reputation intact. I thought I was being kind. You were protecting your own reputation. A theft scandal would have hurt your business. Maybe, but you didn't see it that way, did you? You saw it as humiliation, public disgrace, the end of your comfortable life and social standing. I moved closer and she took a step backward. So, you decided to return the favor. You used your friendship with Alicia to poison our marriage. You introduced her to Trent Maddox. You probably even suggested the affair. That's ridiculous. Wait, you had access to all my financial records, my business contacts, my personal information. You knew exactly how to hurt me most effectively, and you used Alicia and Trent as your tools, letting them think they were the architects of my destruction while you pulled the strings from the shadows. Julia's finally cracked. You destroyed my life, James. I worked for you for 5 years and you threw me away like garbage over a few $1,000s. You stole from me. Imprisonment. I borrowed from you. I was going to pay it back. Entitlement. With what? Your gambling winnings? Ragash, she laughed bitterly. You never understood what it was like to work for you. St. James, the perfect rancher, the pillar of the community. Do you know what you paid me? $35,000 a year to manage a multi-million-dollar operation. I was making less than your ranch hands. Miss Legend. So you decided to steal. Cambios. I decided to take what I was worth. And when you fired me, I decided to take everything else too. Expelled. The admission hung between us like a loaded tool. Julia seemed to realize what she'd just confessed, but it was too late to take it back. It took me 2 years to set up, she continued, her voice gaining strength as she finally told the truth. 2 years of listening to Alicia complain about your marriage, of introducing her to the right people, of planting the right ideas in her head. Relinquid. And Trent? Jiang. Was easier than I expected. Ambitious, greedy, and stupid enough to think he could outsmart you. I just had to point him in the right direction and let his ego do the rest. I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording app I'd been running. Thank you for the confession, Julia. That's going to be very helpful. Crimson. Her eyes widened as she realized what I'd done. You can't use that. I didn't consent to being recorded. Windshield. Texas is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of without your permission. You bastard! Mother. Poor. I learned from the best. Flushing. Started walking back to my car, then turned around. By the way, Julia, you might want to start looking for a new job. I bought the insurance company you work for yesterday. You're fired. Again. Shilm. It was held on a gray Friday morning that matched my mood perfectly. About 30 people showed up, mostly curiosity seekers and bargain hunters who'd heard about the unusual circumstances. Alicia and Trent sat in the front row, looking like condemned prisoners watching their own execution. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice like a rusty gate who clearly wanted to get through this as quickly as possible. He read the legal description of the property, noted the various liens and encumbrances, and explained the terms of sale. Do I hear an opening bid of $500,000? Interceptions. 400,000? Pressured. The silence. 300,000. Azramia. A hand went up in the back. Some speculator who probably hadn't done his homework about the water rights situation. 300,000. Do I hear 350? Thresh on. I raised my hand. 350. Do I hear 400? Mother. The speculator bid again. We went back and forth for a few minutes, the price climbing slowly toward $500,000. Then the speculator's lawyer whispered something in his ear, probably about the mineral rights complications, and he dropped out. 500,000, going once, going twice, 600,000, Alicia called out suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at her. The auctioneer looked confused. Ma'am, do you have the funds to back up that bid? I'll find them, she said desperately. I'm afraid that's not how auctions work. You need verified funds or a certified check. 700,000, I said calmly. Alicia's shoulders slumped in defeat. She knew she was beaten. 700,000, going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 7. I just bought back my family's ranch for less than I'd spent on farm equipment the previous year. After the paperwork was signed and the checks were processed, I found Alicia and Trent in the parking lot. They were loading boxes into a rental truck, probably containing the last of their possessions. "Alicia," I called out. She turned around, and I was shocked by how much she'd aged in the past few weeks. The stress had carved lines around her eyes and turned her hair gray at the temples. "Come to gloat?" she asked. "No, I came to give you this." I handed her an envelope containing a cashier's check for $50,000. "What is this?" "Moving money. Enough to get you and Trent settled somewhere far away from here." She stared at the check like it might bite her. "Why?" "Because despite everything that happened between us, we had some good years together. And because I'm not the monster you turned me into." Trent appeared beside her, saw the check, and sneered. "We don't want your charity, Holloway. It's not charity, it's a business transaction. You take this money and disappear from Texas permanently. In exchange, I don't release Julia's confession to the district attorney." "What confession?" Alicia asked. "Your best friend admitted to orchestrating our entire divorce as revenge for me firing her 3 years ago. She used both of you as tools to destroy my life. The DA would probably be very interested in charges of conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering." Elise's face went white. "Julia wouldn't." "Julia did. I have it on tape, along with evidence of her embezzlement from my ranch, which I never prosecuted before, but would be happy to pursue now. I looked at both of you with my job. I looked at both of you with a little bit of a vehicle, like I would lease Julia list and find from Julia America. I looked at job, which we've been more than we did. I looked at job, Julia America's the check that must have speared. I sensed the check that we find impressed the concepts, but I told them for year. Somehow I looked at both of them standing there in the parking lot, surrounded by the wreckage of their dreams. You have a choice. Take the money and start over somewhere else, or stay here and face the consequences of what you've done. But choose quickly. This offer expires in 60 seconds. Alicia took the check. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my restored ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house looked exactly like it had before the divorce, except for one addition, a framed newspaper clipping on the wall of my study. The headline read, "Former lawyer sentenced to 5 years for embezzlement." Below it was a photo of Trent Maddox being led away in handcuffs after his conviction for stealing client funds. Turned out that when his development plans collapsed, he'd gotten desperate and started borrowing from his law firm's escrow accounts. The state bar had been very interested in that information when an anonymous tip led them to investigate. Alicia had kept her end of the bargain and disappeared. Last I'd heard, she was working as a waitress in Oregon, living under her maiden name and trying to rebuild her life from nothing. I almost felt sorry for her. Julia Morse hadn't been as lucky. My recording of her confession had been very interesting to the district attorney, especially when combined with evidence of her embezzlement and her role in orchestrating the conspiracy against me. She'd been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution for her crimes. My former friends Mike, Tom, and Steve had worked overtime to repair my reputation in the community. Mike had even written a letter to the editor of the local newspaper, publicly apologizing for his role in spreading false information about my character. It was probably the most humiliating thing he'd ever had to do, which made it particularly satisfying. The sun disappeared behind the hills, and I raised my glass in a silent toast to my father. The man who'd abandoned me as a child had inadvertently given me the tools for the greatest comeback in Texas history. There was probably a lesson in there somewhere about the circular nature of justice, but I was too tired to figure it out. My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia. "The Austin development deal is finalized. Congratulations on becoming the largest private landowner in 3 counties. Minimized. I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow, I'd start planning my next acquisition, my next business venture, my next step toward building an empire that would dwarf even my father's accomplishments. But tonight, I was content to sit on my porch and enjoy the satisfaction of a job well done. They'd called me the villain in this story. Heck, maybe they were right. But as I'd learned over the past year, sometimes being the villain was a lot more satisfying than being the victim. And sometimes, the villain wins.